And there's also something funny about these gatherings in that nobody ever wants to sit in the front row. It's like so there is some room up front if you want, and I don't bite.
Could you guys come up to the front?
Yeah, whoever wants to sit. Thank you. This, I got to tell you, this is what makes campaigning and service so fun. On a cold, snowy, wonderful Minnesota morning, that you all show up this far in advance of an election gives me even more optimism and hopefulness, which I hope to share with you today. Because, as Bobby Kennedy said in 1968, these are not ordinary times, and this is certainly no ordinary election. And the fact that you are all here says a lot. And if there's a legacy of this administration, I will argue it's participation. And we got a wake-up call like none other in November of 16, which I'll talk about a little bit. But some of you are familiar faces, but I see a lot of new faces, which I love. And I think it's important for me to share with you my story and what brings me to this pursuit. And most importantly, because I believe representation begins with listening, I want to hear from you. So I want to hear your questions, your comments, your challenges, criticisms, whatever is on your mind. So I was born, who's this by the way? Hi, Bono. Good. we are building a K9s for D&T. And Bono, you're the lead singer. I also want to let you know we have a couple people filming today. Nate, who films. Nate in the back. Everybody say hi to Nate. Nate's a good man. He films for the Republicans. Hoping to catch me saying something that they can use against me. But he does his job. He's a good man. Also have some people on my team filming as well, but they make a point of not filming you, just me. So, with that said, strangely enough, I was born on Richard Nixon's inauguration day. Which maybe is all you need to know about why I'm running for Congress. Born on January 20th, 1969, my parents, Dee Dee and Artie, met at Central High School in St. Paul in the mid-1960s. Both grew up in St. Paul. Artie was raised by my grandma Ruth, a single mother who worked at Kohl's department store in the Highland Village, selling boys' suits to make ends meet. And Artie went to the University of Minnesota, both undergraduate and law school, on an ROTC scholarship because he couldn't afford school otherwise. And he was deployed to Vietnam in 1968 as a captain in the U.S. Army and was killed in action in July of '69 when I was 6 months old. And my mother was 24 years old and widowed, and we moved in with my great-grandparents for the first 3 years of my life in St. Paul. At which point my mom remarried Eddie Phillips, who was an amazing man who adopted me and into a remarkable family of great principles and achievement, philanthropy. Also, some of you might know my adopted grandma was Dear Abby, the advice columnist. And I'm not here to give you advice. I'm here to ask for it. So I hope you'll share plenty of it with me. But as a little boy, I grew up visiting her in a beautiful home in California, and grew up visiting my grandma Ruth in public housing in St. Paul. And I felt that disparity as a little boy, and I didn't understand it. And you can imagine that as I reflect back on my life, I've lived that fine line between advantage and disadvantage, and recognized that not only have those disparities not narrowed, they've only grown far, far too much. So I was raised, and we moved to Edina when I was a little boy. I went to Edina Island School and grew up playing hockey. And was raised in a family that honored and valued and mandated hard work, and taught me to judge people by the character, not by their color. And also that success is not to be measured by how much we collect, rather by how much we share. And work hard I did. I bussed tables and was a bar back at Runyon's in downtown Minneapolis. In fact, I used to spend weekends, Sundays, days like this, getting up on ladders when the bar was closed, and my job was to clean all the pictures on the walls. And if you know Runyon's, they got a lot of them. And the reason I had to do it every Sunday is because cigarette smoke. And I felt at that time, if every teenager had to do what I did on weekends, nobody would smoke. First important lesson. Anyhow, so I worked hard. I worked at Runyon's. I opened a mobile car wash service, and also worked at our family's print shop as well. And when I went to school out east, I came back home, worked at a little startup business in Edina for a couple years, and then joined our family business. And worked in the warehouse, filling orders for a while, and worked in our production department, making schnapps. So if any of you tasted something a little bit off in Phillips peppermint in the spring of 1993, I do apologize. And then on weekends, I went to school at the U. I pursued my MBA, worked my way up the ladder, and eventually ran our business. And in our family, we are taught that business is a means to an end. And the end is taking care of our employees and equally importantly, the communities in which we do business. So therefore, our real family business was sharing, philanthropy. That's what we did at Phillips. In fact, my great-grandfather, J. Phillips, started what is recognized as one of the very first documented employee profit-sharing programs in the country in our business. That's what we did at Phillips. Took a great pair of people there and a Talenti Gelato, and now I opened a couple of coffee shops. So all those of you with a cup of coffee. I'm drinking the competition today, but I'm an equal opportunity. And we're proud of Pennies because we pay everybody $15 as a minimum wage, which means everybody almost at Pennies makes over $20 an hour with tips. And we don't do so because it's easy, but I'm never attracted to things that are easy. But I am attracted to trying to demonstrate that doing the hard thing, the tough thing, the right thing, the principled thing, can create great success. And we want to inspire other companies to do the same. Not necessarily because of a mandate or a law, but because it's the principle. And that's what I think makes this country great. And we're doing so. And we want to inspire people also. I want everybody to recognize that, yes, government has a role to play, especially helping provide opportunity. But we have a lot more power collectively to affect other people's lives, whether it be philanthropically and most importantly, with every dollar we spend and dedicate every single day. The choices we make have far greater influence, I will argue, than any government policy can have on other people's lives. And part of this campaign is to recognize there is a place for government, thoughtful government, but there's also a place for all of us. And that's the mission on which I find myself, and on which I'd like to invite you, regardless of your political perspectives. In fact, the labels these days is another reason I'm so troubled. Which turns me to the election. Actually, I want to tell you one story. I promised I'm going to tell a story about how I first became interested politically. 1980, some of you might remember John Anderson, the Republican congressman from Illinois, ran for president. And lo and behold, he shows up at my middle school assembly and speaks to our history class. And I don't remember everything he said that day, but he certainly talked about the need for independence in Washington and the need to rid money from politics. That evening, my family happened, 4 generations of my family, in fact, happened to convene for dinner in downtown Minneapolis. And I was seated next to my grandmother, Abby, who asked me how my day was. And I said it was amazing. A guy who's running for president came and spoke to us, John Anderson. And she said, well, just so you know, he will not win if he's speaking to middle schoolers. So that was lesson number 1 for myself. But then she asked, Dean, before you continue, are you a Democrat or a Republican? And I said, Grandma, I'm 11 years old. I don't even know what those are. She said, you're a Democrat. So I was anointed a Democrat in 1980 by my grandmother. And I remember getting home that night, getting up on a ladder, and at that time, of course, there was no Google. It was the analog era. And I looked at a World Book Encyclopedia and looked at what a Democrat was and what a Republican was. And I remember watching the returns that year for the very first time in 1980. Walter Cronkite, back in the day where you recognized truth and it was easier to ascertain. And now I turn up the clock to November of 16. I'm watching the returns with my own daughters, my 19 and 17-year-old daughters, Daniela and Pia. And like many of you in this room, I was appalled that our country had taken a turn in a direction that I never anticipated could have been possible. And not just the election night and the result, but the tenor and tone of the entire campaign and the lack of character exhibited in so many cases. And I watched it through the lens of my daughters and felt a very distinct responsibility to do something. I woke up the next morning and I thought, this is the time and the place. Over the breakfast table, I promised them that I was going to participate. I was not going to be a complainer. I felt the collective anxiety within hours of that election, and I knew it would only get worse. But I also thought it was a responsibility to give it a chance, and that's what I did for a little bit. But I'll tell you, I believe that the Constitution anticipated a president like Donald Trump. I do not believe the Constitution of this country anticipated a Congress filled with so many who lack courage. And I would argue Eric Paulson is the poster child for that lack of courage. It is the House of Representatives' responsibility to hold an administration like this accountable to call it out when it's heading in the wrong direction. And my goodness, over the first few months of this administration, some of the appalling behavior and the lack of response made me decide that it's time to run for Congress. And that's why I'm running. And I'll tell you, that's just the beginning, because I did start in that spirit. Since I've been driving my little truck, which some of you are wearing my little sticker, my 1960 International Harvester Metro van, designed to do one thing, to inspire conversation. It doesn't say I'm a Democrat or Republican or anything else. I drive around the whole district and I invite people to have a cup of coffee and share what's on their mind. And I'm going to tell you something really exciting. The fact is, there's a lot less that actually divides us than you might think. Most people in this district, and I will argue far beyond this district, ultimately want the same outcomes. We all want safer streets and a safer country. We all want better opportunity for our children and stronger public schools. We want better quality health care at a lower cost. We want our tax dollars well used. That's the truth, especially here in Minnesota. So I've learned something, I've had an epiphany, and that is, we are not that divided. But there are a lot of people that thrive on encouraging us to do so. So I've transitioned from anxiety to being hopeful and actually optimistic. And this, I will tell you, is the most consuming, challenging pursuit of my entire life, and far and away the most joyful. And that is something I want to share with you, because this isn't about me winning an election. And should I do so and be so fortunate to represent all of you, I'm one voice out of 535 in Congress. This is about you and your friends and your family and the people that you extend invitations to create change. Because we got a wake-up call. A democracy needs it every once in a while. And I know 10, 20, 30 years hence, we will look backwards and actually say thank you to this era. And hopefully this generation, these generations, because given that wake-up call, it's about what we do with it. So I'm going to argue that it wasn't the last election that was the most consequential in this country's recent history. It's the next one, because we have all the information now. We know what is at risk. We also know what's possible. So that's why I'm running for Congress. I'm going to close with a few things I've discovered that I consider to be on just about everybody's minds here in the 3rd District. And then I want to hear from you, because I do believe that representation begins with listening. And that's why I didn't start by saying, here's how things have to be. I don't have all the answers, nor do I have a magic wand. I want to represent. I don't want to be a politician. And that requires that I hear from you and know what's important to you, so that I can hopefully be your advocate. So no matter what is most important to every single one of you in this room, I will ask that your number 2 most important issue be campaign finance reform. Because in this country, my friends, the influence of affluence is destroying us from the inside. And I know we as Americans consider us to be the most ethical, principled people in the world. That's how I grew up, being taught those lessons. And I believe we believe that to be true. But there's a difference, because we have legalized corruption in this country in the form of campaign finance. Candidates and elected officials have to, by the way the system's designed, rely on spending time and cultivating the money class. This is not unique to one party or the other. Where do you think all these millions and millions of dollars are raised every single cycle? From those with means, organizations, federal lobbyists, special interest groups, PACs, individuals. But it's not just about the money that creates quid pro quos, because it certainly does. It's about the time. And the truth, and actually the unfortunate truth, is that just about every one of those 535 members of Congress spend maybe a third of their day, if not more, walking across the street, because you can't do it in your Capitol Hill office, to small conference rooms where they dial for dollars for 3, 4, 5 hours at a time. And do they call you and ask for $5? No, they call and ask for $5,000. That's where the money is. And they show up at beautiful, fancy events the pharmaceutical industry throws, or you name it. And of course, that's where the money flows. And they don't spend time with the people who matter, which is most people, which means people feel disenfranchised, and they don't feel heard, and they don't feel listened to, and they don't think they matter, which is why only 50% of the country or so chose to vote in the last election. So we wonder why. We wonder why Donald Trump sits in the Oval Office right now. That's why. He told people that they have a voice, that I'm listening to you. And I'll tell you, that's what Bernie Sanders said. And he raised his campaign treasurer by $27 at a time. So I'll tell you, there's a thread that connects these two people. And that's it. And if that isn't the wake-up call that we should heed, I don't know what is. I will argue that we have to address the money in politics. There are other countries There are other benchmarks that we can investigate and employ in this country that will be perfectly constitutional, that will do a great deal to affect the change I think we need. Just to give you a sense of how this all works, about $20 to $25 million will probably be spent in the 3rd congressional race, regardless of whether I should be the candidate taking on Eric Paulson or one of the other gentlemen who are also seeking the DFL endorsement. $20 to $25 million, only to be repeated again in 2 years. The minute you're elected or re-elected, you're right back at dialing for dollars. Just to give you an example, our friends to the north, Canada, races for Parliament in Canada, roughly capped at about $180,000 between the two sides in every race for Parliament. Shorter campaign cycles, none of the nonsense that you see on television, none of the mean-spiritedness that we're so accustomed to and now come to expect. They do it better. You know, I also believe it's time for this country to institute a federal voting holiday, a day on which we take the day off, celebrate our freedom, the blessing that we have to vote, bring your loved ones, your family, your children, your grandchildren to the poll and show them why civic engagement is imperative, not just for a successful country, but for the survival of a country. You know, I would like to see the day too when we can only invest in candidates for whom we can vote. Because of all this $20 to $25 million that will flow into this district, in this race, maybe 80% of it will come from outside of the district. And not just outside of the district, from outside of the state. Which means that the people who are influencing our elections are not looking out for our interests, they're looking out for their interests. And candidates are commodities. So if we don't wake up and start acknowledging these truths, we are really putting ourselves on a very sorry path. So campaign finance reform must be effective. There are some ways to do so. Richard Painter, a Republican, White House chief ethics attorney for George Bush, has now taken on campaign finance reform as his most important issue. He's endorsed my campaign, he's an advisor, and providing me very important counsel about what we can actually do under the Citizens United decision, which is quite complicated. And I'm a pragmatic progressive. I have a lot of the same dreams as all of you, and frankly, everybody in this district. But I want to get things done. And that sometimes means looking at what's achievable. And that's why I consult with Richard Painter, who has some ideas on how we can actually take steps now, rather than calling immediately for a constitutional amendment, which is what it would take if we really want to affect change. I want to talk about healthcare. There is no issue that comes up more often at the top of everybody's list for obvious reasons than healthcare in this district. And I believe strongly that it should be a moral imperative, a moral choice in this country, that we provide healthcare to everybody who needs it, regardless of your age, regardless of your income, regardless of your geography, and regardless of your condition. Yes. Yes. You know, we choose to do this with education, everybody, at the beginning of life. Every American child who wants an education is afforded one. Yes, we have disparities that have to be addressed. There's no question, I'll speak to that. But we choose to do so. So what is the difference between that and the promise of health care? My goodness, if we don't choose to do so, shame on us is what I would say. So the question becomes how? And we can do it. I believe we should start by expanding Medicare as an option for everybody to buy into, people like me, who would certainly consider that for my family and me. Complemented with private programs and employer-based programs that many enjoy. That is a beginning, and also expanding Medicaid for those who cannot. But the end game is coverage for everybody and care for everybody. Single payer is a tactic, one way to do so. There are many paths to getting there, and I want to get things done. And that means stripping away the label of a Democrat or Republican and visiting with the many members of Congress, frankly, who want to work together but don't get any airtime because of leadership of both parties right now, frankly. That can be achieved. We need to also address what nobody seems to talk about, which is the delivery of care. Our model is broken. We've got the best physicians, the best health systems, the best researchers, practitioners in the entire world. But we also have a system that is designed to reward procedures and hospital stays. But if you reward procedures without rewarding prevention, we have a sick care system. We don't have a health care system. And this is America. We can innovate, we can change this model, and I think we should. And that will also reduce the cost of care by keeping people healthy instead of only treating them when they're sick. And thirdly, I want to reduce prescription drug pricing. You know, the President in his State of the Union address referenced this, and I was very pleased. We should hold him accountable for this promise. The question is how to do so when the pharmaceutical industry spent $240 million last year paying for 3 lobbyists for every single member of Congress, and enriches campaign coffers to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars a year. Do you think they want to see lower prices in this country? Probably not. But my friends, we subsidize the entire world right now. Every country around the world, for the most part, pays less than we do. And that's not right. We can affect that. The VA negotiates pharmaceutical pricing very effectively right now. We should send people to Washington that will mandate and pass legislation to allow Medicare to do the same. There is no reason not to. So let's begin the migration to value and to prevention and to thoughtful care for everybody whenever they need it, and allowing people to amplify their coverage with private programs. That's America. If there is a great American promise that is true amongst Republicans and Democrats, it's that we take care of people. We also afford choices to those who have been more successful, more fortunate to do it, maybe a little bit more access, a little bit more fast, or a little bit more enhanced. That's not wrong. That's how most people believe it should be done, and I believe we can do it. I'm going to also want to talk about education, because I find it appalling that the federal government does not fund IDEA, which is our special needs funding for our schools, to the tune that they promised many years ago. We, collectively, everybody who lives in the 3rd District, has to make up for $147 million annually in unfunded federal mandates that are not coming our way from the federal government that we have to pay for, which means we can't hire more teachers and better support staff, and we cannot place mental health professionals in schools. And my goodness, do we need them? Not just in schools. We have to destigmatize this notion that mental health is any different than physical health. My goodness. You know, these are not complicated changes. It's just someone who represents these interests to try to get it done. And I would argue teachers are the most important professionals in our entire society. You know, we should elevate, make it the most esteemed profession in this entire country, and ensure young people with the talent and the interest can be put on a track to become teachers at a young age, and do so. And again, these are all possible. And this is everything I hear every day from Republicans and Democrats and Libertarians and everybody in between. So that is my epiphany that I wish to share with you, is that this is not rocket science. But what is rocket science is actually doing what we're doing on our campaign. That is not accepting money from PACs, not accepting money from special interest groups, and not accepting money from federal lobbyists. Because how can you go to Washington and advocate for these changes when your lifeblood of being reelected and maintaining your career, as Eric Paulson has done now for 30 years, 10 years in Congress, how can you do that if you're beholden? You can't. That's why there are only 6 members of Congress. I wish it was 5, because I could use one hand, but it's 6. 6 members of Congress, especially when you got a cup of coffee in it, 6 members of Congress refuse to accept those dollars. Only 6. And we wonder why. We find ourselves with a dysfunction, and lack of progress that we are subject to. So, that's the good news, is that this administration has inspired an entire wave of participation, not just in this district. I'm just one of them. Thousands in local elections, and municipal, and state, and now federal. There's going to be a wave, I would argue, in November. Maybe a Democratic wave, but either way, there will be a wave of people on both sides of the aisle who I think I got a wake-up call. So, with that, I'll share a little lesson my great-grandfather taught me, the lens through which I view policy and possibility. And he said, Dean, money is like manure. When you stack it up, it stinks. And when you spread it out, it fertilizes. And if we thought a little bit more about that, if everybody in this country did a little bit better, those at the very top would do a lot better too, and we would be a better place. And I think it's time to start affecting some policies that provide those opportunities, but that we decide to start doing that ourselves too, because that's where the power lies, and that's what my campaign's all about. So thank you for being here, and now I want to hear from all of you, and we'll have a little fun. So what's on your mind? Yes?
All right. My family's sick at home, excuse me, but I can't help but sick with that bus. What do you call that?
I call this the government repair truck.
Okay,
By the way, not just about repairing government, but it's repairing people.
For sure, for sure. You and I are basically about the same age, so we must know about
28.
Remember him?
Of course I remember Paul, and
What
still
about
inspired.
his life and his legacy? What are you inspired inspired by from him, and I can't help but think that the vehicle is quite very.
Sure.
And secondly, as a college instructor, as I shared with you, Dean, what are we gonna do about making college affordable?
Thank you. So, first, Paul Wellstone. What inspires me about him is, first of all, David taking on Goliaths and doing it in a way, I'll tell you, there's some analogies.
For
You
sure.
know, if you remember the Where's Rudy spot that he ran, he would run
Yes.
around all,
Yes.
wouldn't find Rudy Bosworth at the time.
Yes.
Well, I don't know about all of you, but I'm struggling to find Eric Paulson.
That's right.
And I mean that sincerely, everybody. You know, I mean that sincerely. I would love, you know, I want to visit with Eric Paulson. He's my representative too.
Sure.
You know, I've tried, and in fact, I did a parade right here in Mound earlier this year. It was a little bit different 6 months ago than it looks right now. I've tried at parades to actually go get him, and kind of speeds off and doesn't seem to want to. You know, he doesn't show up, he doesn't hold town halls, we all know that. He doesn't show up in public forums or at public gatherings. Now, if you pay $2,700
Then he's there.
or $1,000 and become a member of his Eagle or Independence Club, he'll take you to Crave for a nice dinner. That's not how things should work. Paul Wellstone did the same thing. He said enough of this. You know, and he used, you know, by the way, and his bus was similar to my truck, which is simply a way to get people to come out and talk. Because in this day and age, if you're the Democrat or Republican, you tend to only attract and preach to the converted. So he had a miraculous way that I now honor in my own way to bring people out and talk. So that's one. College affordability. Yeah, I was just yesterday, I was at Minnetonka High Schools, visiting with high schoolers. And of course, the environment and college affordability are all that's on their minds for the most part. And I'm a big fan of letting states, encouraging states to test innovative ideas across categories, including expansion of MNCare in our own state in healthcare perhaps. I would argue that we should look at New York State, which this last year passed legislation that will afford free 2- and 4-year SUNY education, State University of New York educations, to students from New York families that earn less than $125,000 a year.
That's a start.
It's a start. So, and it's a beginning, exactly. But that's what I argue. We have to, you know, it's like Neil Armstrong. You know, so these are steps, right? And that's what we have to do in all policy. That's why, in fact, making major changes to any policy always has consequences that are unintended and sometimes very destructive. But the beauty of our republic is that states can test ideas. And the best ones will rise up, you'll tweak them, you'll make fixes, and then spread them and replicate them. So I think we should look to New York State. If they can do it, there's no reason other states can't do something similar. And look, I'm a Democrat who believes in 3 fundamental values: truth, and justice, and opportunity for all. And education, I would argue, is fundamental to providing opportunity. We cannot guarantee outcomes. I'm not someone who believes that government has a responsibility to guarantee outcomes. It is not the case. We can do a heck of a lot better to guarantee opportunities, and then let the best and brightest and hardest working do it, and then provide for those who are not able to, for reasons that we can all understand. So that's how I look at that. And I don't have an answer, but I can tell you one thing: as a father of one college student and now almost a second, you know, when the median American family income is lower than the average private and then out-of-state public school university tuition, that I would argue is a big problem. And I don't think I'm unique in that perspective. So it has to be addressed. And only from talking to a lot of high school students and their parents has this issue been elevated in a way I didn't anticipate when I first started this campaign. So rest assured. My daughter's my current, the one who's in school right now is at Miami of Ohio. And my youngest is going to Emory in Atlanta.
Yeah, check out the community colleges in the Twin Cities.
That's what I do all the time.
I
Yes.
teach at Normandy and MCTC,
Oh, wonderful.
so great places.
I've met more people on the campaign trail who came to this state, even from out of our country, to go to MCTC. In fact, the man, Abdul Omari, who is an extraordinary man, a regent of the University of Minnesota, his parents came from overseas to Minneapolis to go for MCTC.
Yeah.
He is now a regent at the University of Minnesota, and he is the mentor to our Phillips scholars, a group of about a dozen African-American young men from around the country who come to Minnesota to go to college, that we don't just provide scholarships to, but also mentorship and support. And that's because of MCTC. That's easy to do. So I celebrate it.
Thanks for
And
coming.
you gotta go.
Bye-bye.
Special super secret campaign handshake. Yes,
I'm interested in how you're going to pay for that.
how am I gonna pay for?
Education.
How to pay for education? So this is the, of course, I like just about everybody, would love to see everybody be provided what they need somehow, some way. But of course, it's not possible, and that means college education. We as a country can't pay for everybody's college education. But it's like healthcare. We can certainly reduce the cost, I believe, and provide more access and opportunity. And that's why I think New York State should be looked at very carefully. It's a new test. I don't recall the exact numbers, but it is not bank breaking. It is, I think it's $150 million a year or so, thereabouts. I don't know for certain. But if New York State can figure out how to make it work, I would argue that is something that other states should start investigating and implementing. And whether this becomes a state-based program or somehow federal, I don't know. And I think in this case, state-based programs, because of state and land grant, at the universities, have a distinct opportunity to do so, to do better in this category. I do not argue that there should be some national initiative to send anybody to any school at any time for any reason. No. I do believe, though, for those who have the potential and the interest, that we should find ways to do so. Because that should be the American promise. If you have the ambition and are filled with possibility, at least let's provide you the opportunity to shine. That's what I believe. But we should also realize, too, everybody, and I'm hearing this every day, I visit with the trades. And they have extraordinary training facilities. IBEW I just visited, the most extraordinary training facility for electricians. In many cases, trade members are making 6 figures a year and cannot find enough talent in the community to become electricians, plumbers, painters, carpenters. So we have a little disconnect. This notion that you have to go to a 4-year college to be successful in this country is not true. There was probably a time where it was true. But thanks to the internet age and access to technology and access to education and experiences, I think young people are being exposed and educated in more profound ways than we ever imagined. And that means we should also promote career paths that are maybe a little different than 4-year colleges. And that includes the trades and apprenticeships. And there's some great opportunities there too. So those are my thoughts. Yes, sir. 3 questions.
First, I just spoke to would you be interested in some sort of a job corps as a means to pay for that, where kind of like the old program or exposure where you want to be a doctor, will pay to be a doctor, but you have to put in a certain amount of public service to pay for that education. And then that would put talented people into or carpenter or whatever. Is that one of the solutions?
Let me answer that one at one time if I can. The answer is yes. In fact, again, I'm the son of someone who only went to college because of a program that did just that, ROTC. And in return for his education, he had to go, he had to serve his country. So I've seen what government can both provide, and of course, in this case, what it can take away. But that's the promise, and I do believe that can be expanded. ROTC is but one example of a way where we can provide opportunity to people in return for serving, especially when it comes to healthcare. Rural communities cannot attract enough, family health practitioners. Period. So how do we promote that? That's perhaps one way to do so. So to your point, the answer is yes.
My next question is about healthcare.
Okay.
I am self-employed. I pay my own insurance for ever. I think that the healthcare system is in trouble. My grandmother was a nurse, my grandmother was a doctor, my mother was a doctor. I've seen this firsthand with what's happened to the healthcare system. Couple of questions. Where do you see the changes in making it affordable? I think that you're right, that we're a fee-based system. How do you feel about Manuel's Healthcare for All forum, if you would look about it? And where do you see, given the drug industry is out of our healthcare? I think not only are they expensive, they're overprescribed. And what part of the food industry do you see as a problem? in all of this, then that we are an unhealthy nation, because I personally think the food industry is as bad as the tobacco industry. That the food industry is not feeding us, and it's not making it easy to be healthy. It's actually making it easy for us to spend a lot of money on food.
So there's a lot in that question.
Yeah.
Let me try my best to answer it. Relative to healthcare and somehow reducing costs. Let me start with something that I've only discovered in the last year, and that is that acupuncture, as an example, is a very accessible treatment that has, in many cases, up to 90% effectiveness vis-a-vis opioids in pain relief.
But it's not necessarily total.
Well, you're answering my question. I mean, your question, which is exactly, just so everybody knows, acupuncture. How many in the room have had acupuncture before? Oh, what, more than I would have expected. Successful? Okay. So most of the research indicates that in many cases, acupuncture can be as successful as pharmaceutical treatments, particularly opioids. And as far as I don't know anybody addicted to acupuncture. But sadly, and I'm sure everybody in this room has been affected to some degree with people who have had problems with opioids. And it's a big, big problem. So, yeah, the case is that most insurance plans do not cover acupuncture. That is in a nutshell, is exactly what's wrong and how beautifully fixable it is. I do not understand, and that's why I will argue that if private insurers don't cover such things, let's expand Medicare that does. And then the great American promise of choice is you have a choice. You want a private plan? Make the choice. If you want a public plan, like Medicare, that maybe does it a little bit differently, that's better for you, make that choice too. That's how we begin a migration. And then the other way to reduce costs is to, again, try to keep people out of the hospital by investing in their health beforehand. There are a lot of ways to do so. You know, by the time you actually have to be hospitalized, it's too late to lower the cost. But we can, between nurses, what a wonderful opportunity to elevate nursing in this country, to actually try to identify symptoms and problems way before they manifest themselves in the need to go to the hospital. So there are ways, and there are systems around the country that do a lot better job, I would argue, than we do to keep people healthy. You know, remember too that we have some wonderful health systems in this state that through philanthropy are doing a lot of this work. But that's not sustainable, particularly as I'll talk about with this tax bill, which I think is going to lower charitable giving in the state. But when we have to rely on charitable giving to keep people healthy, rather than the incentives in the system, we're in big trouble. Capitated models like in California, Kaiser Permanente. That is the capitated model's notion is if you invest in people before they get sick and try to keep them healthy, the costs of care ultimately will go down because you'll have to be hospitalized less. So there are ways to do it. There's not one singular way that it accomplishes it all. And as anybody who's in business knows, it's usually not one lever. It's pulling a lot of different ones that result in the change that we want.
But where does the insurance industry fall into this? Because I really think that in my situation, right now at my age, if the Affordable Care Act hadn't gotten through, my insurance, just for me, would cost well over $700 a month. And my cap would be $10,000, and everyone that goes over that's $10,000.
Sure.
If you get sick in November and you have to pay it again in February, now you're $20,000 in debt. How many people have $20,000
Exactly.
sitting in the bank waiting to pay for their health insurance? I don't think, and Medicare is a 20 policy, 20% of $100,000 is $20,000.
I got it. Let me answer, and then I got to give other people. You're right. And in fact, not only do most people not have $20,000 sitting around, most people in this country don't have $500 to take care of a car repair when they need it. That's the truth too. And I recognize these disparities. The ACA, it was a step in the direction. It wasn't the end-all be-all, and it absolutely needs fixes. And what I find really upsetting, in fact, another reason I jumped in this race is when Eric Paulson voted on the AHCA, the American Health Care Act. That was, I think, one of the worst bits of legislation that this country has seen on the House floor in so long, I couldn't even tell you. Who in their right mind could vote for something knowing that about 20 million people who currently are insured would, whether by choice or by mandate, if you will, lose their insurance? I do not get it. And then who would vote for a bill, as so many just did, that strips the individual mandate that will further raise all of our insurance pricing, our premium prices? Because the fact is, if we don't have young, healthy people paying into the system, We all know what happens. You don't have to be an insurance guru to understand how insurance markets work. So yes, we have to stabilize the markets. Andy Slavin is a member of our community, has endorsed my campaign. He's a counselor of mine, probably one of the foremost minds in how we can actually fix the ACA. And there is a group of legislators in Washington right now that have some very thoughtful fixes to the ACA. Short term, that will help people, perhaps like you. But it can't even they can't even be heard on the House floor, not to mention the Senate floor, because of leadership, okay? Which indicates further to me that we have to send people to Washington. I don't care which parties. People who are there to get things done, that's what matters. And we can. So that's my answer. And part of this exploration is identifying the best ideas, and I want to hear from you.
Thank you.
Behind.
The CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Board, what do you think?
Can you be a little more specific?
Well,
What do you think?
they're shutting it down, it seems to be in trouble. I'm told that they are responsible for ruining the banking system and destroying local banks. Is that true?
I don't have an answer for you, and this is why I do these. That's why I have these events, is to understand something I may not be terribly invested in, if you will. And that's an area that I should.
It's not true.
Okay, well then thank you. Then thank you. And I'll tell you, but that's why I do this, is to hear what's on people's mind. This is not something that has come up a whole lot. But I'll tell you, with your question, I will investigate and have a position on it.
What are the initials?
Zero.
What's that?
What is the initials that you just said? What is that?
Consumer finance.
Consumer Financial Protection Board. This was more than
CFPB, yeah. Look, I'm someone who believes, I'm going to tell you about my values generally. Government can play a role in protecting people, and has to in this country. There's no question. I'm also a business person, one who operates a small business. So I'm just giving you my values. I'm not specifically speaking to this. So I will say that what I bring to this race, and potentially as a representative in this district, is someone who has been subject to a lot of regulations, frankly, that are really burdensome for small business in particular. Try to open a coffee shop, my friends, if you want to understand how complicated, how we diminish opportunity by over-regulation. There is a truth to this. That does not mean in this case that's the case, but because we do need protections, and short of those, we will be taken advantage of. There's no question. So I am someone who balances both, because I hear every day from people who should have been protected, either by their friends, neighbors, or even in fact our government, who are not. And I also talk to too many people who are overburdened and cannot succeed despite their extraordinary hard work because of over-regulation. And I like to see a thoughtful balance. That's who I am. Yeah.
Hi. I don't have a question. You should be happy.
Oh.
I have comments. Partly
Please.
because I agree 100% with all the issues you identified, from accessible health care to finance reform. As we probably may not realize that I feel we are in a donor-driven democracy. Okay? So you said something you don't realize that, and resonates with me a great deal. You said, doing the principled thing to make our country great. I think that really should be our answer to Trump making our country great. Doing the principled thing, bringing the best in all of us, not the lowest denominator. That should be your campaign slogan.
I like that. Will you please share that with me?
Yeah.
Let me tell you something to that end. I'm glad you bring that up, because as some of you might know, we will be putting up a campaign ice shack on Lake Minnetonka in about a week. I'd love you all to come to our grand opening. It's the Government Repair Shack, to complement our Government Repair Truck. And the first invitations I extended to ice fish together were Dave Dernberger and Walter Mondale, because it is time that we remember that this state shares a very important place in our country's history because of thoughtful conversation between Democrats and Republicans. Some of you recall the Time magazine cover many years ago with Governor Anderson on it. The Minnesota Miracle. That is because we have two parties that were there for the right reasons, principled reasons. And this country is well served by having a diversity of opinion, not to mention backgrounds and colors and races and religions. And why now we've come to the point where political division separates us more than just about anything too often is appalling to me. So to your point, principle is not unique to one party or the other. Principle is unique to the individual. And I'm so glad you say that, and that's exactly what this is about. So thank you.
You said that.
Well, thank you. Still. thanks for re-saying it. Oh, anybody on this side of the room? In the back.
You're going to have an ice shack, and hopefully it's on the lake, and you will have good ice for it. And but one of my questions about we know that Minnesota, there are studies showing that it's one of the first states in terms of getting having climate warming. There are a lot of opportunities and a lot of dangerous changes that are going to come from the changes in climate. Minnesota is also, kind of leader in terms of developing renewables and closing coal plants and using wind. So, how informed and where do you stand in terms of renewable energies, low carbon economy, and preparing Minnesota for the changes, mitigating them, but also adapting?
Thank you. So the question is about the environment and climate change, renewables, and the like.
Yes.
The fact that our campaign had to even contemplate the notion that there may not be ice on Lake Minnetonka to put our ice shack up as recently as 2 months ago says everything you need to know for reasons you can probably imagine. And I'm someone who happens to believe in science. I believe climate change is real. The fact that this is a political issue is yet another symptom of this national disease of polarization that has to change. I believe that we left the Stone Age not because we ran out of rocks, We left the Stone Age because we found better ways to do things. That is America, innovation. And we have better ways to do things. To your point, Minnesota is a leader in renewables. Governor Pawlenty, a Republican, signed legislation in 2007, I believe it was, that actually had a mandate, or at least a goal to achieve much, I think it was 25% renewables. We're going to exceed that. And it began with that. And Xcel Energy is decommissioning coal plants. Not just out of principle, but because economically it's feasible. And I just visited the IBEW facility where I spent a lot of time in their solar training rooms and learned for the first time that we can generate almost as much solar energy in Minnesota as Florida can. I didn't know that. Not to mention wind, and we're blessed with water and hydro if we wish. So we can do it, and that's what excites me. And this is a perfect example of where Republicans and Democrats should be on the same page. But we make these issues political, so it's which team wins versus the national team, and I'm appalled by it. So a perfect example is just that. We can address these things. We are doing it. Some states right along with us, Iowa, California. I think, and by the way, young people that I speak with every day in this district when I can, that is foremost on their minds. I have great hope that this will accelerate and make extraordinary changes. We're getting there, and I'm glad you bring it up. Yes?
Thank you. We risked some pretty dicey roads from the time of Tuesday, and one of the reasons I did is I want to see if you had any fire in your belly, because I'm looking for a candidate who's really going to stand up. Seriously, this is the time, right? But here's maybe a question we may get in debates. We've had this really crazy experiment with having a president who has no political experience. So could you speak to your transferable skills?
Sure.
You're going to be writing legislation. I know you can probably work across the aisle. You seem very charismatic and personal. How are you going to meet the challenges of researching, getting up to speed, and vetting congressional appointees,
Sure.
and all of that? What are the transferable skills?
I'm glad you bring that up. The question is what makes, the question is, we have someone in the White House who brings nothing but business experience to the job, and shady. So how do I transfer my experience to the task at hand? So I'll start by saying that I do not aspire to be a politician. I aspire to be a representative. And I would argue that's what I've been doing my whole adult life. As a business leader and someone who's built organizations, who has found the very best ideas, not just in the management offices, if you will, amongst management ranks, but by making it a point to speak with people in the warehouse, on the production line, our sales reps and so forth, representing these great ideas. I've been a representative. When I've been in sales is representation. I'm representing my business, the people with whom I work, the products I sell. This is the U.S. House of Representatives, not the U.S. House of Politicians, which is indeed what we have now. I want to do
You have
just
to
the
learn about
opposite.
legislation,
So-
are you a student
so-
of history, do you know?
Yes, so let me, I'll speak to it. The answer is yes. I've been practicing, if you will, for this, probably my whole adult life without even knowing it. Building businesses, building organizations, listening, learning, studying, and then in the community. I helped bring We Day to Minnesota, along with David Stillman in the back of this room, who I see who's an extraordinary man. We Day has service programs in 600 Minnesota schools and encourages young people to engage in philanthropy. Because I believe in the power of young people. Through my work in the community, in schools, and in trying to provide opportunity to those who are not afforded, to be a voice for the voiceless, and to listen to those who are unheard. This is what I've been doing. And I'm not going to tell you that I have all the answers. I'm going to tell you that I do not have all the answers. But I'm going to tell you something that's going to maybe shock many of you. I want to speak with people who look at things differently than I do. I was taught that if two people agree all the time, you only need one of them. So I want to meet with people and listen to people who see things very differently, identify what we share, and then get some things done. Eric Paulson has been doing this for 30 years. I would argue he's inexperienced because he's not been subject to the policies that he's been affecting for 30 years. He has only been a politician, and we have a Congress filled with people, my friends, who are there hoping to preserve and protect their jobs more than our country. So I do not tell you that I have been studying for this my entire life just to do this. Just the opposite. I never imagined. I've always been engaged, but I never imagined that I'd be running for Congress in this race, but for the circumstances. So that's my promise to you, is that I will listen, I will study, I will learn. I have worked hard, I've studied hard, I've got a lot of life experience, not just in this country, around the world. That's what I'll bring to Washington. That's my promise. Yeah.
There are those of us who are maybe more liberal than others, who sometimes worry that pragmatism is kind of a moral relativism. The idea that you're not aware of the problems with the Consumer Financial Protection Board, and that you answered that question by talking about how government has made difficult your personal business. Do you feel then that Wells Fargo and JP Morgan are put upon or predators? I mean, those are issues that I think you can't actually approach those with the, well, let's see, let's learn and see. I think you have to have an opinion on that type of issue. My point being that to some degree capitalism will do what is antisocial if it's profitable.
And I respect that. Now, I'm not here to tell you I'm the most liberal candidate in this race. I never have said that. What I have said is I've spent my life respecting positions across the political spectrum. People far to the left of me and people far to the right of me. That's true. And what I said in response to the question posed right here was not that government has made my business impossible. To the contrary. Our businesses in the food business, ice cream, Talenti Gelato, in the beverage business with Phillips, and now my coffee business, a lot of the regulations that we are subject to, if you will, are really important ones, without which they would be detrimental to people who we serve. I absolutely, wholeheartedly agree. There are some, though, that are terribly burdensome. And by the way, I'm not bringing this to you from my personal experience. I listen to people every day, from Independence to Chaska to Rogers to Brooklyn Park, who are sharing these concerns with me. So they're real. Now, you talk about Wells Fargo and US Bank and the big banks, of course. These are big, big organizations that I recognize. Without thoughtful policy and to some degree thoughtful regulation, many would spin out of control, and we've seen the effects of that. What I'm trying to argue is that there is a thoughtful compromise, if you will. Thoughtful regulations that are needed, and also some that are probably not. That's my only argument. But I started this whole conversation today by reminding all of us that as Americans, thank goodness we have choices. Nobody in this room has to bank with US Bank. Nobody has to bank at Wells Fargo. Nobody has to shop at Walmart. Not yet. But so I'm very sincerely, if I don't encourage everybody every day I have to remind that if we really want to affect change in this country, we have to do two things. Send people to Washington that at least are decent and willing to listen, and start doing so with your own wallets and choices. And that's not antagonistic, that's opportunistic. There are hundreds, thousands, next time you go to dinner, Go down to Nicollet in Minneapolis and support one of the extraordinary, ethnic restaurants that have popped up, that have so little in the way of financing to make their restaurants look beautiful, but have the same dreams that I know my great-great-grandparents had when they came to this country. And let's vote with our wallets. That is with banking, that's with eating, that's with shopping, that's with your hardware, that's with your local services. That's how I feel. And yes, we need some thoughtful regulation sometimes, in many cases. The fact that I'm not as up to speed on this question as I should have been, I'm not ashamed of, but it's an opportunity. And I'll be somebody who will tell you when I don't know the answer rather than make one up. So I hear you, and I want to be someone who represents I don't want to be the Democratic version of Eric Paulson. I want to represent not a party, but a district and the people. And if we start migrating to that, which is the American principle and promise that I believe our founding fathers and mothers wanted, we will make some progress. That's what I'm looking for. Yes.
Dean, if I may actually bring you up to speed on two topics right here. Yesterday, Janet Yellen, in her last day as federal board chair, slapped Wells Fargo with an unprecedented constraint on growth and 4 new board members.
Yeah, because of the fake accounts.
The day before, or 2 days before, Mark Mulvaney, the Trump's
Secretary of Treasury.
well, no, he's now heading up the Consumer Finance Board.
That's right, yes.
And they just stripped I just forwarded the email to you, but they just stripped the Consumer Finance Board of their ability to regulate discrimination in lending.
They're constraining them in a lot of ways. I know,
Well,
I get it.
no, but they just gutted that out of the CFPB, so.
So, yeah, let me say one other thing that I think is actually a answer to this question, is if you have most politicians in Washington take money from the same banks we're talking about right now, their political action committees, massive amounts. I don't know what the number is, but you can go home after this event and go to opensecrets.org and find out where the money comes from and where it goes to. Let me assure you, it's massive. I don't take that money. So when it comes to these decisions, I look out for people first, plain and simple, because nobody will affect me with their dollars. And I'm not doing this because I want to make a career of it. I've had a wonderful career. I also believe in service when it's necessary, and this is necessary. So I want you to know how I feel more than I want you to know about ideology, because my ideology is listening, learning, and taking care and protecting people who deserve protection. And the David amongst Goliaths, back to the Wellstone question. That's really that's the umbrella answer to this question. Yes, in the back.
I would like
Oh,
you to
okay.
address.
Can I just in the back, just because you've already, between the two of you, you've asked.
Can you tell us?
I thought you were coming. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead. You're you.
Okay, I would like to have you address the isolationist issue that our
Thank you.
current administration is dealing with. My understanding from my source is that today, every month, we get a deficit of 50 billion from China.
I'm sorry, you said every day we have a?
Every month.
Okay.
It says, today's data shows that the overall monthly trade deficit reached 50.5 billion in November 2017. Okay, we've been, dealing with NAFTA. Now they've got this other one, U.S.-China bilateral investment treaty, and it would empower Chinese corporations to sue the U.S. government before a panel of 3 corporate lawyers to demand unlimited sums of America's taxpayers, including for the loss of expected future profits. So if you become elected, you're gonna have to deal with international trade issues.
Sure. Which
Can you stress that?
Yeah, and I can address that too, and also from personal experience. I have personally done business in Eastern Europe, right around the fall of communism. Dealt with communist governments. I was responsible for our international sales at our business. I spent a lot of time overseas and have a lot of experience dealing with both governments and businesses around the globe. You talk about isolationism and also foreign policy. I want to wrap this all into one important answer. One of which is we should all recognize that the State Department is being dismantled as we speak. That's one thing. And every dollar that we take away from diplomacy means we're gonna have to spend another dollar on bullets. I don't know if you've heard, every dollar we take away from diplomacy, we're gonna have to spend on bullets. That's one seriously important issue. You know, I do believe in fair trade. We should have thoughtfully negotiated agreements relative to trade with every country around the world. And that doesn't mean you get everything. You know, as I often say, we have to meet. You don't have to, not always in the middle, but you gotta meet. That means you have to give and you gotta take. That's the spirit of negotiation. That's what I've been doing my whole life. You know, China, our trade deficit with China is massive. And the day will come, probably not in the too distant future, where there will be another country around the world that has even lower cost labor that will replace China as a place where a lot of goods are made. And how we handle such trade relationships are terribly important. I also should remind everybody, because I know you all know, that the recent tax bill is going to add yet another trillion or another $1.5 trillion, most likely, to our national debt and explode our deficits. And who owns a lot of this debt? Of course, countries around the world, including China. So we are increasingly affecting policy that we're going to have to pay a big price on should interest rates jump, and I think we'd all agree in this room at some point they will. Anybody who lived in the 1980s remembers. So these are truths. And this all comes down to the basic principles of being strong, not caving in on principles, but negotiating is the key. And that's how I look at all trade deals, and that's how I've been doing my business my entire life, as I sell others as countries. I'm sorry?
Did you support the abandonment of the Trans-Pacific agreement that Trump blew off?
You know, so here, I'm gonna answer this in a way that may not satisfy you, because I think it's time for this country to collectively look at all of our trade agreements. Trump has asked that we look at trade agreements in a way that puts America first. I look at trade agreements as ultimately the best trade agreements are ones that everybody has to give up a little something. It's true in any human negotiation. There were elements of TPP that I thought were good. There were elements that were not so good. There are elements of NAFTA that are good and not so good. And I'm going to tell you, give me an example. I'm just going to give you an example of NAFTA. We're in the ice cream business. One of my jobs was to sell our ice cream in Canada. I go up to Canada, I sell to one of the biggest grocery chains in Canada, only to find out the next week that we can't sell our ice cream in Canada without a tariff that would triple the price of our product, because the NAFTA excluded the dairy industry. So the Canadians invited us to build a plant in Canada and take jobs to Canada, but they would not let us sell our ice cream in Canada. And I thought, my goodness, I thought NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, was exactly for companies like ours, not massive, but successful, to sell our goods and reciprocate. That's not how it works. There are too many agreements, everybody, that the truth is, if you look at them very carefully, and that's the problem, is we get snippets on television of these trade agreements and what they mean and how they affect people, but the fact of the matter is, every industry is treated very differently. So my experience...
Are you saying that the Canadian dairy people are allowed to sell here without tariffs?
It is easier for Canadian goods, dairy goods, to come to this country than it is for ours to go to there. In fact, you will almost not find any American dairy products in Canada. What they do is you outsource. What we could have done is contracted with a Canadian company to make our ice cream and sell it there. It's a way for them to preserve their jobs in the dairy industry in Canada. And this is what happens. So every agreement we have around the world has to take this into account. We also have to be respectful. You know, sovereign nations also are looking out for their people. So we should only do deals and only affect trade deals that are thoughtful for both sides. And the fact of the matter is, many of our deals right now don't. And many of them were signed in an era that is quite different than the ones we face right now. In the back.
Can you tell us who and what corporations financed your political opponent's campaign or Paulson's campaign?
Yeah, the question is, which companies and enterprises finance Eric Paulson's campaigns? I believe the best answer is most. And I say that not even jesting. If you go to opensecrets.org, I really encourage you all, please, to do so when you have some time. And don't just look at Eric Paulson, look at industries and categories and where their dollars go. Of course, you can draw conclusions and tie them to the votes. Eric Paulson has generated over $7 million during his terms in Congress from political action committees, and they are across categories. Every industry you could possibly imagine. Not to mention federal lobbyists, the same people that come into your office and explain to you why you have to vote a certain way on a bill give you money. The same people that actually write some of the bills, the same people that write some of the bills, give you money, come to your office and lobby you, and you have to make a decision on which way to do it, especially since you got to do this every 2 years. My goodness, this is not rocket science. So that's the best answer, is go look yourselves. It's massive, and he takes a lot, more than many, but there are some that take a whole lot more. And this is not, I want to make it really clear, everybody. I speak truth. And the truth is, members of both parties do it. This is not unique to Republicans or Eric Paulson. But it is unique to this system. We are the only system of its kind in the world that I would argue allows dollars to affect outcomes legislatively like we do.
So a follow-up, what percentage of those contributions come?
I'm sorry?
What percentage of his contributions come from individuals
thank you.
as opposed to
I'm
corporations?
so glad you asked that. So we just released some information yesterday that shows that I raised $1.2 million since I declared my candidacy, only from people, only individuals. I believe that Eric Paulson in that same time, or actually in even more time, because he's been added, he was added a little before I in this cycle, raised about $800,000 or so. So I've raised almost 50, I think 50% more, if not more than that, than he has. But I've raised $0 from federal lobbyists or political action committees. I send checks back every week from political action committees. People who have not met me, think about this, everybody, people who have not met me, have not spent 5 minutes with me understanding where I come from, what I stand for, what I believe, and what I intend to do, sending me checks in excess of $1,000. I mean, I don't know about you, I wish people did that around the holidays for me, but not politically. That's the way this game works. So that's why no matter whether I succeed or not, whether I serve one term or maybe more, I will never take money from these entities because it is the principal thing to do. It is the principal thing to do, and we need to recognize where the money comes from, everybody. If there's nothing else you leave with today, please look at Open Secrets. And you will be energized, inspired to do even more than you're doing right now, I promise.
Are they, you believe that they are the same people who are sending Eric Paulson checks? Are you, the ones you're sending back, have you noticed whether they're the same, are they funding both and hoping for the best outcomes?
Well, there are some people that if you will invest in both, yeah, no, I know in fact there are some people that have shared, individuals that have shared money with him and also contributed to my campaign, yes. But because I don't take, lobbyists, the federal lobbyists or PAC dollars, by definition, they're not shared because I won't accept it.
What's your average donation?
Average donation, I think, is a little over $100 and some dollars.
Yeah, you got time for probably one more, so we can
Okay.
take time for conversation
Yep.
before we wrap up.
Oh, in the back.
Hi. Hello, Dean.
Hello, Logan.
This may sound like a softball question, but it's not, and I really hope that if you and Eric Paulson go toe-to-toe, that someone will ask this specific question. Where do you get your news source? Do you go to NPR? Do you do the New York Times? Do you listen to Fox? Do you read Breitbart? Where do you get your news source?
Thanks for asking.
You're welcome.
I spoke about Walter Cronkite earlier for a reason, because I grew up as a boy watching Dave Moore and Walter Cronkite pretty much give the news to me and my family, and it was original. After dinner we watched the news, and it seemed to me at that time that facts were facts, whether they were distributed by ABC, NBC, or CBS, or PBS. And then people debated them, and that's why I spoke about Dave Dernberger and Walter Mondale. That's their era. You took the facts, you might have different perspectives on how to use those facts. Now we live in an era where everybody's a journalist. Anybody can express an opinion, and sometimes there's very little that differentiates a robust, thoughtful, honest news source and one that is completely made up, and I know we're all subject to it. So to answer your question, I make a point, this is my nature, I make a point of investigating news from across the spectrum. I do, I listen to NPR in the morning, and I'm not just saying that. I listen to NPR in the morning because I consider it to be a thoughtful news source. Gives time to both parties, shares multiple perspectives. I do watch CNN and I watch MSNBC, and I also watch Fox News. I have to. If I don't watch Fox News and understand how Think about it. Half of the country is receiving their news source. That's a dereliction of duty on someone who's running for U.S. Congress, everybody. But that is the truth in this day and age. And I invite you to do the same. Because this is what's forming opinions. This is what's, no, I know. I'm not saying believe it. There's a difference. But my friends, look at it. You don't have to vote for me, but I'm going to tell you what I think we need to do, and that is at least listen to other perspectives. And I'm appalled by what I see often from these other perspectives on Fox News sometimes. I cannot believe they present the information that I see, would argue is factual in a way that seems so different. But these are the truths, everybody. If you want to understand what's going on in this country right now, we have to do that. So to answer your question, and I read the Wall Street Journal, I read the Star Tribune, I read the New York Times. I devour news because if I don't do so, I have no sense of the 535 members of Congress, over half of who seem to see things so differently. But in so doing, that at least provides an opportunity to say, I understand, but let me present my perspective. So that's the challenge we face. That's the blessing and curse and the unintended consequences of every innovation that this world has ever known. We take a step forward, and there are consequences, and these are our consequences. So the facts are the facts, but now it's what we do with them. And I'm going to argue that we have a responsibility to listen to everybody. I think one more question. Yes?
You talk about funding, where you get your money from. To me, the more important thing is after you're elected, where are you going to get your money from? And not only that, how much time do you have to spend to get reelected? You don't have any time to do the work. That's just really, isn't that the main crux of the problem?
Well, I'm doing this a little differently. I've told you, I made the promise to you that I won't accept money from political action committees, special interest groups, and federal lobbyists. I'm surprised that we do allow it, but the fact is it's allowable. I choose to do it in a different way, like only 6 members of Congress do. So the question is, should I be so fortunate as to represent you in Congress? How will I generate resources if I want to be reelected? And I'm going to do it the same way.
How are you going to get the time to do it?
So I'm glad you bring that up too, the time. About a third to a half of the time that members of Congress have right now that they're supposed to be serving us are instead serving donors, picking up the phone, as I said earlier, and we call it dialing for dollars is the jargon. There's an entire industry set up to create strategies, connections, and methodologies to raise the money. That's the industry of politics, everybody. It's not representation right now. So and that may mean that if I'm elected and have to and want to stand for re-election, that I will be at a disadvantage. And the way I see it is, as long as people have the information about the differences between the candidates, let them make the choice. If they want someone there who doesn't take money from these interests that have an expected return on those investments, then you get what you pay for. So I make that promise to you, and I recognize it might put me at a disadvantage. But boy, it's the right disadvantage, and I wish more politicians, and I wish more candidates and representatives would do it the same way. So if I can be one voice, I'll be a loud one, darn it, but if I can be one voice and start representing what I think should be done, we'll make change. And I'm going to close this by reminding you again, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump could not be more different. Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump could be not more different relative to their character, their values, their life experiences, their strategies. But I'll tell you, there's something that they both said, if you really look at it carefully, that really inspired people. And it's everything that I'm trying to say today, which is we have allowed, legalized, and propagated a system that is really destructive to representation, very productive to politicians. And if we remember that, I've talked to many Bernie Sanders supporters who ended up voting for Donald Trump.
I know.
Because of the appetite for disruption, the appetite to be heard, the appetite for someone to just listen to me. That is what I'm trying to affect. But I'm trying to do it from a place that actually can get it done. And let's find other people out there like that. Maybe someone in this room right now. Run for a local office, a school board, mayor, city council, local commissioner. Let's start sending people who want to do it the way that I know we can and I know we did. That's my responsibility. So I would love to be your next congressman. I'm Dean Phillips, and I'm grateful for your time. Thank you.